Waiting to hear from me. This is Perry Stuckey from Eastman. First of all, let me start by saying I am humbled and honored to join you today and just speak with you for a few minutes about why it is so important that for diversity and inclusion. You know, I think if you're going to be successful in this space, one of the things we must do is we must make sure that we are inclusive, and that is that we create a work environment for all of our employees in this great state of Tennessee to show up, do their best work, build a career, and want to stay. I think it's also important that diversity includes everyone. It should not exclude anyone, because it's not inclusive if any organizations are excluded. For the sake of time, since we've lost quite a bit of time here trying to get the technology to work, I'm gonna talk about three important principles that I try as a leader to make sure that I embark upon in all that I do. I remember when I was in undergrad, my college professor said to us that you can't blame other people for your failures. If you do, you must give them credit for your success. So that's really has been a principle that I've tried to live by, that no matter what organization I'm a part of, no matter what's going on as business leaders, you know this well, in the great state of Tennessee, we must take ownership for where our organizations are. It is our duty and imperative to make our organization very diverse and make them reflect the demographic of our state. Now, this slide I wanted you to see because I pulled some data, and of course, this was as of July 2019. Our population of the state of Tennessee is roughly 6.8 million people. And if you notice that our female population is a little bit large, over 51% of the state is female, 48% is male, and 17% is Black or African American, another 5% is Hispanic, and then 2% Asian. So I think one of the challenges for all of us is how do we make sure that our organization demographics reflect our state and reflect what we have inside of our state. So one of the things we are trying really hard to do here at Eastman is that we have some ambitious diversity and inclusion goals around representation. We want our workforce demographics to be comprised of 50% female by the year 2030. We are working toward that journey. We at approximately 38% today, but we do know we have enough women in our pipeline to help us get there. We think gender parity is important. You can see what it says about our state. We also know that there are more women graduating from colleges than men, if you look at the current data. But more importantly, it's incumbent upon all of us to be intentional. So one of the comments I want to make about diversity and inclusion, you will not make lasting progress unless you have intentionality in this space, and you need to be extremely intentional about making sure your workforce represents the demographics of our state. Now, I'm not here to tell you what your workforce diversity should be. All of you are business leaders, elected officials who know that. But I do want to say that I would encourage all of us to stretch our thinking, look at where our demographics in the country is going to be over the next 20 years, and skate to where that hockey puck's going to be, to create an environment that where all walks of life, all individuals can feel good about working for our respective organization and feel good that they can be in a state like Tennessee, and we can be a model to the rest of the US in this space. And look, I realize that in the midst of a black swan incident like a global pandemic, we've experienced some unprecedented times in our organizations. I recognize that there are many small business owners in our state who frankly right now are just trying to make ends meet. They have had to lay off people because their business is struggling in the midst of a pandemic. As a matter of fact, a friend that I know well owns a couple of restaurants in the Tri-City areas where I live. He was telling me, Perry, look, I had 285 employees. I ended up being down to 65 just because I had to close my business given the pandemic. Now, one of the things he's done, he's brought all of them back to work, and I'm very proud of the work he's doing. He has them all back at work, all 285. And I think another very, very important principle that we need to consider, and this is the second principle, and that is to make sure that we understand our obligation to leave our employees and our communities net better. And what does that mean when I say net better off? That means that even though you may have to do a workforce reduction, even though in a situation like this, but you know your objective as leaders is to ultimately help your employees thrive, help your employees achieve the right type of savings to live long into retirement and to ultimately be net better off after having been employed with you. That is a principle that I try extremely hard to live by, that I know that we may have to make tough decisions given the fact we're a global company, I should say, and we do business in over 120 countries around the world, and it's not easy. And I know that there are times we have to even do workforce reductions at Eastman, but ultimately the long-term objective that we have as a senior leadership team is how can we leave our employees net better off for having worked for us? And that means that it takes unselfish leadership. It takes people who are committed to ensuring that you do everything within your power as a senior leadership team to help your company be successful. If you're a public health company, to drive shareholder value, but also make sure that you're driving value for your employees. At the end of the day, all of our employees are the faces behind our product. They are the individuals who make us successful. So it's important that we try to leave them net better off than when they came to us. So if you look at our demographic data, and I'm going to remove this slide now, you know, ask yourself this question, am I trying hard to make sure that my people of color represents the demographics of the state of Tennessee, 17%? Am I trying really hard to make sure that our female representation, since it's a little bit over 50% of this state is female, that I have the right female demographics inside of my organization? So we can remove that slide now, and I can take a look at, you can see me better off. So I wasn't quite ready for this slide, but I'll go ahead and highlight the point here that I want us to understand is that one of the things that's really important for any leader, and that is to have an uncanny ability to demonstrate courageous leadership in a time of crisis or when that time is needed. And all of you know this inherently as leaders. You can't find your values in a crisis. You must have your values before the crisis occurs. And one of the people that I want to highlight that I think was a remarkable individual and someone that had an uncanny, courageous leadership and did that, and it is Master Sergeant Rhodey Edmonds. This individual was from Knoxville, Tennessee. During World War II, he was part of the infantry division, and he was a POW. And when he was captured by the Germans, he was the highest ranking non-commissioned officer. He was a sergeant in his group. And there were over 100 and there was over 1,000 men who were captured with him as a POW. And the German officer told him that Edmund, I want you to make sure that in formation tomorrow morning, that you align and you bring in all of the Jewish people in formation. So what he did, he sent a message to all of the leaders that we were all going to stand in formation. We were not going to abandon our Jewish soldiers. And he stood up and the commander said, all of you cannot be Jews. And Rodney Edmonds said that I assure you, sir, we all are Jews. And he stood, and because of his stands, and the officer became increasingly unhappy. And he put a gun to his head and he said, I want the Jews to step forward or you could be killed. He said, sir, we are all Jews. And that's called courageous leadership, the uncanny ability to stand strong in the face of adversity. And I want you to think about that as a leader. Are you standing strong as a leader in the face of adversity, doing the right thing? And many of us can talk about the untimely incident of George Floyd's death. Are we going to be like Master Sergeant Edmond? Are we going to stand for our comrades? Are we going to stand for our fellow employees? Or are we going to not take a stand? And because of the stance he took as a POW, he's credited with saving over 2,000 Jewish people's life. And this is a native son of Tennessee. And he was a POW for 100 days when he got out of the Army, and when he came back, to Tennessee. He never told his family about this incident. And what I've learned about courageous leaders and organizations, they don't look for any recognition. They stand and they do the right thing. And so I think we could all be proud of this individual, but also think we stand on his shoulders as citizens of this state. Are we going to stand strong and take the right type of courageous leadership when it comes to driving a more inclusive workforce, a more diverse organization for all of the companies that we represent, for all of you who are elected officials? Are you going to stand courageously and take care of your most vulnerable citizens that you've been elected to serve? Good leaders do not blame people for their shortcomings, blame other countries. They take responsibility for their actions. And a final comment that I want to make, and a final slide that I want to leave with you, is a note that Dr. King said. Dr. King said, and as we advance to my final slide that I wanted to highlight for you, Dr. King made these words. In the end, he said, "We will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." So now I want you to think about that. And when Dr. King made this quote, he was giving a speech in 1965 and was discussing how many Americans did not stand up against discrimination of Black people during the civil rights movement and what they endured. My question for you, given what we are experiencing in our nation today, are you going to be silent? Are you going to take courageous leadership and do what's right for our great state of Tennessee? Make sure that you have a very inclusive organization, that you have the right representation inside of your company to help this state be great, to help your organization be extremely successful long term. We must all skate to where the hockey puck is going to be within our society. This is our time to make sure we collectively make our voices heard. And one of the things that I'm proud of, the Chamber of Commerce has a rich history of making its voices heard. As a matter of fact, if you look at how our chamber was founded in the state of Tennessee, back in 1912, there were 150 leaders who boarded a train from Chattanooga to head to Nashville on a mission to protest against what they considered were unfair taxes. And from that time on, the chamber has taken up the mantle of leadership for small business owners, for small companies, to make sure their voices is heard, because global companies and large companies have a lot of strategic leadership that can help, but our small employers do not. And the chamber has been great at this, and let's continue to drive a more inclusive organization and to drive leadership and to help our organizations be better and help our state be more successful. So let me pause there and take a couple of questions from the audience. And I do apologize again for the technology glitch we had, but given the fact that I want to keep us on time, let me pause there and take questions that you may have for me. Can we open the chat up for any questions that people may have? I hope you can hear me. I hope I've spoken in a way that you could hear me.
Absolutely, Perry. Thank you so much. We have opened the chat. So if you have questions, please enter in there and we can ask Perry. I do have a question that came in the chat. What strategic steps are you taking at Eastman to increase the number of women in the workforce?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. You know, look, we are hiring off college campuses today at Eastman. 40% of the people we hire are female. And, you know, we hire primarily engineers because we're an engineering company, and, you know, we have a lot of chemical engineers. We believe that it's important that our workforce represents 50% from a gender diversity standpoint. We know that our state is more than 50% female, and by 2030, our goal is to be at gender parity, and that's something that we've committed to. We were one of the founding companies that signed on with other companies across the U.S. For gender parity. The other thing we want to do is we want to be a leader around people of color hiring. And so we have aggressive goals and targets by 2025 and 2030 to do that. We just think it's the right thing to do. You know, we fundamentally believe that every employee we have is extremely valuable to us within Eastman, but we have to do a much better job in terms of gender diversity as well as people of color diversity in our organization. And we're working hard to make that happen. And I'm highly confident we will do that. And so the only way this is going to happen, you have to have your board of directors align with us. As in our last board meeting, we had a board meeting 2 weeks ago, and we spent an hour and a half devoted to this topic. How can we collective as a senior management team and our board make our organization reflect the demographics we know our nation is facing? And we also work locally in our community in the Tri-Cities with the chamber and our leaders to talk about what we can do to have a more inclusive Tri-Cities and a more inclusive state. So that's important to us. So thank you for asking.
Okay, Perry, you have another question. East Tennessee does not have the same diversity statistics as the rest of the state. Therefore, for companies in East Tennessee, what are the diversity ratios that we are trying to reach in our communities of this region?
Well, you know, I can't speak for the other companies in East Tennessee. I can only speak for the company I work for, Eastman. And so, you know, we hire nationwide, so we don't limit our statistical analysis and data to just East Tennessee. So this is why I told you our goal is to be at, by 2030, to be, you know, to reach parity around gender diversity, that we have 50% female, 50% male in our organization. That's a goal of ours in terms of what we want to do there. We also believe that it's really important that we exceed the number in our area. So for Blacks and people of color, our goals are going to be more like 12%, 27% by the year 2025 when it comes to people of color. And those are the type of stands you have to take. You have to be intentional to do the right thing and create an opportunity for many of those individuals and those groups who have not had the same opportunities that many others have had in our workplace. It's also important that we support our LGBT population as well. And that's what we are doing as a company, because we believe fundamentally that every person who works in our organization have the right to be treated in a workplace, the same opportunity for promotion that anybody else have. And so that's what we are doing. And that's why our expectations are higher. We don't benchmark East Tennessee along for what we're trying to do. And I would encourage other companies, if you're in a small area where the diversity makeup racially is not that high, I would challenge you to look to the broader state of Tennessee to make your numbers in your region look a lot like that.
Thank you. Another, how has the definition of diversity evolved in the last 20 years in terms of how corporations prioritize inclusion?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, you know, look, diversity alone is not going to help you. So here's an example. If you don't change the culture of your organization, people are just going to come in the front door and go out at the back door. So it's really important that you have an inclusive culture where everyone can thrive in that organization. And if you don't do that, people who are highly talented, highly skilled, will look for an organization where they will be embraced, where they can do their best work, build a career, and want to stay. So for us, everything we talk about within Eastman, we lead with inclusion first, and then we talk about diversity, because we know without an inclusive culture, then your organization's not going to be successful. And that doesn't mean that we don't have a place where white men are welcome. That's nonsensical, because frankly, an inclusive environment means every single individual who works in your organization has an opportunity to contribute. And when we think of diversity and inclusion, we think of it in a broad sense that it includes everyone. So thank you for that. Tell me how much time we have left, because I unfortunately, due to the technology glitch we experienced, I don't want us to get far behind. So please let me know how many more questions I can take given our allotted time here.
Sure, thanks for that so much. We have 2 more minutes. I think we'll have just a couple more questions if you don't mind.
Okay, so I'll take a couple more questions, then I'll summarize and leave us with a challenge. Okay,
That's perfect.
three principles. Okay.
One question here, any successes or failures you can discuss as far as your career has, that you can?
As far as my career or as far as my work, listen, my career is filled with many mistakes I've made. I fundamentally believe that if you're going to be courageous, you have to do things where you stand out a little bit on the limb and put yourself out there. So I'll just give you one short example. At Eastman, one of the things that was very important for us is that I knew that if we were going to be successful, that our education and awareness needed to start with the top of our organization, where we spent the vast majority of our times educating our employees about what does inclusion look like, how do you be an inclusive leader, and we took our senior management ranks through a lot of education and awareness. Now, as I look back over that, if I had to do it over again, I probably would have equally, since our manufacturing footprint is extremely big, I probably would have focused on the same amount of attention to educating our manufacturing workforce as we did with our senior management and our mid-level managers. If I had to do it over again, I think I would be taking a two-pronged approach to try to do those simultaneously. So that was a great learning for us, how we probably could have made more progress in this space. And here's what I want to encourage you. When you go on this journey of inclusion and diversity, it's not going to be perfect. You have to continually learn. You have to continually create an environment where your employees can speak freely and be candid, because you're going to make some mistakes. It's going to be messy to get better, and you have to allow that. I think that's a good thing. One of the things I'm extremely proud of is the ERGs we have. They work in our community. They work with Miles at the chamber here. They work within our communities and help our community leaders see how we can make our region even better in East Tennessee. This is a beautiful region, a beautiful part of the country. And I think inclusion and diversity must go beyond your workplace, and you must involve your community leaders to work hand in hand with you, because when we attract a scientist to this region of the state, they also looking that they not only want to work in an inclusive company, but they want to live in a community that's inclusive and that they can feel like that is safe and that is good for their families as well. And so we do a lot of work with our community, trying to make sure we do everything to make this entire region an attractive place economically to live, an attractive place for other corporations to want to come and relocate into. And I think it's fundamentally essential for you to do that. Don't just think about inclusion and diversity in your own company, but help impact your community as well. And I think when you do that, you not only have a better company, but you also have a better community as well. So let me take one final question, and then I'll wrap up with 3 points that I want you to remember, that I wanted to start from, that I didn't get to share.
Rick, this presentation has been great. I think we are ready for the closing comments and your wrap up, and we appreciate you.
Sure. So let me just recap some principles that I would challenge all of you to continue to try to live by on a daily basis. And that's the principle of not blaming other people and other organizations for your shortcomings, because if you do, you must give them credit for your success. So any organization that we are part of, any organization that we get hired into, we have to take responsibility for it and recognize that, give credit to our employees for the success in our company, and take responsibility for all the shortcomings of our company. One of the lessons I learned working early on many years ago in a not-for-profit, when I had a lot of volunteers who worked for me, they didn't get paid. One of the things I learned was to take responsibility for all the failures of the agency and give them credit for all of our success. And that has stayed with me, because that's the mark of a good leader who takes responsibility for failure and don't blame the team that worked for them. The other important principle is understand that our ultimate goal as business leaders and community leaders is to leave our employees net better off. And that means we just can't think of just driving profit for shareholders, or what's the right thing to do for our employees. And it doesn't mean you want to experience something like a pandemic where you have to lay people off, but your ultimate goal is to always leave people net better off. And my final principle that I want you to remember is the uncanny ability to stand courageously when it matters most. That's what we saw this great sergeant from Tennessee do during World War II. He stood courageously and he protected the fellow Jewish soldiers who were there with him. And he did it, and he was honored by Israel with the highest award you can achieve by that country for his leadership. And so I would admonish you, given what you know we've experienced in our nation around racial division, you must stand courageously and make your voices heard and do the right thing all the time. So that's the point I want to leave you with. Thank you for giving me the privilege to join you. And I do apologize for the technology glitch we had at the beginning of this. So I feel badly about that. I don't know what happened. So thank you for allowing me to speak to you for a few minutes today. And thank you for serving in this great state that each of us get to call home, the great state of Tennessee. So thank you. Are we there?
Yes, thank you so much, Perry. I'm going to turn it over back to Bradley Jackson.
Okay, thank you.
There, thank you, Susie. Susie, can you all hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much, Perry. We greatly appreciate that and appreciate your insight and the partnership that the Tennessee Chamber and Eastman have had over the years. Next, I'm going to introduce Rick Wade with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and open it up for Rick. Rick is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Outreach for the U.S. Chamber. He develops and implements programs and initiatives to help the Chamber create new business relationships and partnerships across diverse audiences. He also provides counsel on policy issues and leads a number of special projects. His wealth of knowledge and experience in both the public and private sectors enable him to give a megaphone to the voice of business across the country and share the positive impacts of the free enterprise system. Before joining the Chamber, Wade was principal of the Wade Group, a strategic communications and global business development firm, and was partner at Harvest International Group, a consultancy that facilitated foreign direct investment in the U.S. Wade's also worked at the Commerce Department, Economic Development Administration, fostering regional economic development in distressed areas, National Telecommunications and Information Administration on expanding broadband to rural and urban areas, Minority Business Development Agency, creating jobs through the growth of minority-owned businesses, and the Census Bureau on executing the 2010 decennial census. In addition, he's worked on Vice President Joe Biden's task force on middle-class America and worked with the White House on implementing the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Rick, I will turn it over to you. And on behalf of the Tennessee Chamber, we greatly appreciate the U.S. Chamber's leadership on a number of diversity and inclusion issues. It is good for a state association to be able to watch really kind of our parent and our partner implement such strong partnerships, and we greatly appreciate the one we have with you all.
You bet, Bradley. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me for a few minutes this morning. You know, it was very fitting and proper as I was listening to Perry talk at the last moments of his presentation, and the quotation there from Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, the reality is some 57 years ago, over 250,000 Americans convened right here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, for what we know as the historic March on Washington, which was punctuated by Dr. King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech, but often overlooked in that speech a half century later. The full name of the gathering was actually the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And with a heavy focus on, you know, closing the stark gap that exists in economically and in unemployment and economic opportunity between Blacks and white Americans. And the reality is that, you know, more than a half century later, while we've made some progress, that gap still remains and it's been widening. And the work to close it remains more important now and urgent than ever before. Still today, the opportunity to obtain an education and secure a job and start a business or simply provide for your family is often determined by the color of your skin. For decades, Black unemployment rates have been consistently twice as high as white unemployment rates. Black students are twice as likely to attend high poverty schools than their white peers, and Black business owners still struggle to access much needed capital for their business ventures. And then finally, Black Americans are just more likely than whites to be arrested, convicted, and sentenced, making it even more difficult and sometimes impossible to re-enter the job market and build a new and better life. One of the most fascinating partnerships that I've developed over the last couple of years is with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation around one of its most fascinating research reports, the business case for racial equity. We understand the moral case and the moral imperative, but they talk about the business and economic case. And here's what they say, that the persistent racial disparities and inequalities that we see today, that they did not happen by accident, but they arose from a long history of deliberate policies that were based on race and have been perpetuated by bias that remain. And you and I, and we all understand that systemic inequalities hurt individuals, communities, they hurt business, they hurt our economy, they hurt our society. But Kellogg went further and said in his report, they concluded that if we work together to address these racial inequalities and close these gaps, that our GDP grows by some $8 trillion. And that is a very significant economic case that we're leaning in and leading at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So here's the deal. The pandemic, the corresponding economic downturn and crisis has thrust all of these issues. We think about the murder of George Floyd and other racial unrest that played out across America's landscape, has thrust all of these issues in the spotlight again. And we believe that our country is at a turning point. And so I'm really proud that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the largest business organization in the world, has stepped up to lead in this really, really important place. And I want to talk just a minute or two and then obviously leave this open for questions and answers and some dialogue, I hope, on what we have launched called the Equality of Opportunity Initiative. Next slide. And I think as our president, Suzanne Clark, said, and she said it appropriately, as our nation undertakes a necessary and lead solutions to help ensure that Black Americans and people of color have greater opportunities to succeed in the American enterprise system. And so with that in mind, we launched this Equality of Opportunity Initiative to develop and advance data-driven business and policy solutions to bridge the opportunity gaps and ensure that Black Americans and all people of color have greater opportunities to succeed. Next slide. And one of the first things that we did, obviously, was to listen and learn. And that was extremely important as we put this historic, most impactful initiative together. We convened state and local chambers and trade associations and corporations and entrepreneurs for an amazing gathering, a town hall of sorts. But we started out even with the steering committee that included not just state chambers, but local chambers, trade associations, even all of the diverse chambers, the Black chambers of commerce, the Hispanic chambers, the Pan-Asian and Asian American chambers, LGBTQ chambers, et cetera, in a really broad dialogue about how we address these inequalities that exist in our country. Next slide. And on June 25th, we hosted a fascinating national conversation. If you weren't able to participate or join in, I would encourage you to go to uschamber.com, the Equality of Opportunity Summit. It was a fascinating dialogue with some fascinating individuals from across our country. Tom Donahue, our chair and CEO, Suzanne Clark, the president. My good friend Gail King moderated a forum with AT&T outgoing chairman and CEO Randall Stevenson. We had representation from the historically Black college and university community, which obviously has a big presence in the state of Tennessee. The Kellogg Foundation. We even had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, not just because of his tremendous athletic history, but his commitment to STEM education. He talked a lot about the work he's doing in that particular space. But it was a fascinating dialogue to listen and learn. Next slide. And the other thing that we decided to do was base our work on research and data, which we believe is extremely important if we're going to measure our work. And just on a robust and exhaustive body of research, which you should take a look at. It's called the Equality of Opportunity by the Numbers, again, which is on our website, uschamber.com, Equality of Opportunity. And that's very important. And I think, and what we're looking to do now is build the same kind of data and research state by state, but it's a treasure trove of research. And we think data is very important as we lean in and lead in this particular space. I won't go through all of that, but obviously some of the findings that you're probably aware of, that Black students are twice as likely to attend high poverty schools. Black Americans represent 12% of the American workforce, but only 9% of workers in high earning management in professional positions. 12% of the labor force, but only little over 9% of the business owners. And the data is just rich. And again, it's extremely important that we use data to inform our work and our decisions to close these gaps. Next slide. And so again, using data, we developed this agenda, and we decided to focus on 4 critical areas: education, employment, entrepreneurship, and criminal justice. We're looking to add 2 other pillars, health and wealth. Very, very important. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has displayed again the tremendous health disparities that exist across our country, and we're looking to lean in and advance private sector solutions as well as policies to be able to close those gaps. Next slide. And I won't go through all of these, but again, after listening to business leaders and CEOs and government policymakers, just a tremendous network of stakeholders, these are some of the solutions that we're advancing. Expanding K through 12 school choice options, closing the digital education divide, which has been front and center again as a result of the pandemic, exposing the tremendous gap in broadband that exists across our communities and states, particularly in the South. I'm originally from South Carolina, and we're seeing the same disparities in my home state in terms of the connectivity, but not just for our students, but for even in the area of health. How do we improve secondary education transparency and college readiness? And we're leaning in again and putting prescriptive policy solutions and business solutions forward to be able to close these gaps. Next slide. And in the employment area, how do we use data to improve our workforce diversity, promoting investment in opportunity zones? We believe that opportunity zones are a great model, can be strengthened to demonstrate better outcomes. And we're going to work with whatever the administration, as well as Congress, to be able to advance additional opportunities through the opportunity zones. We got to work towards available and quality, affordable childcare. Improving minority networks through internships and apprenticeships, a number of solutions, again, on the employment front that we think could be very impactful. Next slide. And same on entrepreneurship, on the business front, how can we work with corporations to increase supply chain diversity? We're working very closely with the National Minority Supplier Development Council and other organizations to look at how we can strengthen supply chain diversity across business and industry. The Minority Business Development Agency, which is the only agency in federal government housed at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where I used to work, is probably one of the least funded agencies. It's not even codified. It exists by White House executive order. And so we're leaning in on legislation to make that a permanent agency and increase its support and funding so that it can work with more minority businesses across the country. Next slide. In the criminal justice front, just again, how do we make sure that folks, as they transition back into society, have a fair chance at a job and employment and to build a productive life, fair chance housing and fair chance hiring, that is, and second chance hiring, clean state reforms, and yes, even restoring voting rights. These are all issues, again, that we're working with Congress at the moment to advance legislation to address these and other issues. Next slide. And so what's next? We're really proud of the work that we've already done since June. We've already endorsed over a dozen bipartisan bills that work to address some of these issues, and we're really thrilled and excited about that. And the work continues to go on. One of the things that I may not have mentioned, but when we convened this town hall and this agenda, we had over 500 state and local chambers and other associations sign on with the pledge and commitment that they would continue this dialogue at the state and local level, and also build their own agenda to work within the state houses to advance these same issues. And it's not a one size fits all. You know, you may decide in Tennessee to address unemployment or to address healthcare or other specific issues. But the idea is that this work cascades down to the state and local level. And we're seeing this happen across the country, moving from just dialogue and convening, but to real strategic action through legislation, as well as the business community leading in on business solutions. Next slide. And so there's more to come. We're in the process. We'll be endorsing more legislation on Capitol Hill in a bipartisan approach, as also making recommendations to members of Congress where there's not legislation. Making recommendations on prescriptive policy changes to address equality of opportunity. We're continuing to convene and hold summits. We think dialogue and conversation is extremely important, and we're really thrilled about the work that we're seeing thus far. We're not going to solve these issues overnight, issues that have existed in our society for hundreds of years, but we believe that we're making great progress. Next slide. And you're already involved by virtue of your hosting this conversation today and the work that you're already doing. That's what we're asking of the business community, of our leaders across the country. We believe together that we can take this dialogue and turn it into real action. A lot of people are asking, does this moment feel different? I believe that it only will feel different if we move towards real action, and the end result is making sure that everyone has can obtain the American promise of equal opportunity. Next slide. And that's it. And I would love to have take any questions that you may have. Again, I thank you for inviting me to present and have this conversation with you. You're already in the fight. We appreciate the work that you're doing, and we look forward to being a resource for you as you continue to move down this journey to create equality of opportunity for all people in Tennessee. And that's good, not just for Tennessee, but good for America. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. We do have a question. And the question is, how do you convince employers to look past criminal justice involvement to give returning citizens the opportunity?
Well, I think the data is pretty clear. I mean, listen, as these individuals transition to our society, the goal has to be to make them, to integrate them back into our economic mainstream. And that is about jobs and employment. And so that's the perspective that we're taking. We believe there are a number of ways that we need to reform our criminal justice system, but we decided to focus in on employment. And how do we get them gainful employment? That means job training. That means looking beyond, their past to the extent that can be done, and giving them another fair chance at hiring. And there's some really fascinating programs across the country that have been successful, and we're looking to model those and create best practices that hopefully you in the state of Tennessee and others can learn from and implement as well.
Thank you so much. And we have time for one last question. How can we support the voice of minorities where their populations are small?
Well, yeah, I think this is a good start. I think state and local chambers have a unique opportunity. One of the things that people don't know, and obviously, that the chamber community across the country is the most unique infrastructure in America. We're connected at the state level and the local level, and obviously we've been in Washington. And, whether it's a small minority community or not, this starts with dialogue. We need to create these inclusive dialogues. And I think local chambers are uniquely positioned to do that. If you don't engage the minority community, I think Perry alluded to this earlier, engage the local community, particularly local minority businesses. We've created this interesting coalition of all the Black chambers and Hispanic chambers, et cetera. Nationally, we're trying to model that behavior at the local level. These are not just potential members, paying members of your local and state chambers, but their voice is really important as you put forth your legislative agenda. The relationship building is extremely important. The last thing I'll say about minority businesses, we did a survey with MetLife, which we do annually, and we recently did one that specifically looked at minority businesses across the country. And what we found was that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on minority firms. Some 66% based on our data, and there have been other reports done as well, are concerned about permanently closing. So small business generally having a really, really tough challenging time, but minority businesses are having a disproportionately harder time. And we're looking to lean in and be able to help them sustain themselves and survive. And I think them becoming a part of your state and local chamber ecosystems can provide a lot of support, a lot of relationship access so that they can strengthen not themselves for today and tomorrow, but for the future.
Great. And one last question was, how do we stay in touch with you? Is the email on the screen that is showing now, your email address, rwade@uschamber.com, is that the best contact?
That's the best place to contact me, and I always respond. So I love to hear your thoughts as we walk this journey together. And please let me know when I can be of help.